EventRights is a collaborative project. It involves academic partners, and we look at human rights and major sport events. We want to make those events more inclusive, more promotive of human rights, and in the end, we want to have a better, more sustainable event for everyone.
We started looking at this legacy of some of these games. We started building these connections, collaborations, published a book on these things, and then from some of the research that came out of this legacy, issues related to human rights became, part of the conversation. And so I started building more connections with people like David McGilvray at the University of Western Scotland and other collaborators. And we decided in 2018 to kind of look at this issue of human rights and mega sporting events, along with some non-academic partners.
Probably in the last decade, we're seeing a rise in the use of the language around human rights, and to some people using it as a force for good, and others where the debate is a bit more as to whether the human rights abuses within countries, should that give them a perspective, and should they be allowed to host mega sports events? And that's led to sort of debate in terms of whether that takes place.
Well, I think we're at a real crossroads right now, because there's a lot of work being done around human rights, but I'm not sure that people really know or understand what the meaning of human rights is. I think it's very contextual, depending on where you are in the world, the cultures you're working with, the particularly inclusion and access issues. So I think there's a lot of discussion and debate, and there are no experts in this space. So I really want to make sure that the voices of those who have experienced marginalization are those that are being heard in the human rights space.
The world of sport has immense power, and it can use to either sports wash and cover up their disastrous human rights record, or to set a high bar for countries that want to participate in sports and share sports values. That's why the bidding phase is so important when it comes to ensuring human rights are respected.
I think sport is often seen as a kind of moral good, and people think it's wonderful watching sport. I mean, we grew up watching sport, we grew up watching Olympic Games. People might be able to reflect on the Olympic Games that was part of their youth. They're massive media events. But I think one of the things that people have not been as aware of is the costs associated. So some of the more autocratic states have bid and are willing to put the money in to host these events, and potentially will generate quite significant revenues for the IOC or FIFA from hosting these events. I think one of the things we have to be careful of is to think that events can't change everything. So events clearly can't address human rights related issues that take place in a country. But certainly what they can do is that the event itself can ensure that it isn't designed and planned in such a way that it infringes significantly the human rights of affected groups.
Back in the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa, in the preparations for that, we saw kind of cleanups of the streets to make way for spectators to come to Cape Town. So there, I think 600 children were moved off the streets and into kind of an apartheid-style relocation camp. And then in the preparation for kind of other events leading up to the World Cup, they moved children and youth off the streets into an overcrowded prison as well. So I think a big piece of the work that we often do with organising committees is looking at stakeholder engagement and the importance of engaging with everyone who is going to be impacted by your event, and that should include children. So traditionally that has been very tokenistic. I think even in recent mega sporting events we've seen maybe schools are able to design a motif or something, or design a mascot. But meaningful participation looks at kind of asking children how this event is going to impact them, and considering maybe even how neighbourhoods are relocated, or roads are closed to make way for an event, and how that could impact children's access to school, access to healthcare and things like that. So that's something that we've really been trying to emphasise in the work that we do.
And housing continues to be one of the major issues with these events. Whether you see that in Rio, where it manifests as evictions of people from favelas, houses being demolished, people ending up on the street, Or you see that in somewhere like Paris, where people aren't necessarily directly evicted because of the Olympics, but the investment and the way the investment is conducted leads to increases in rent prices, and therefore we get much more what we call gentrification, so pushing people out.
But we're also interested within sport, so the rights of athletes, for example, within sport, and what they can and can't do in the context of attending or participating in a FIFA World Cup or an Olympic Games.
So that's also the impact of mega sporting events, because once we are there, what we feel is that those mega sporting events, they're not made for us. We're just an instrument of that, kind of like a puppet on that space. And if you look at the Rule 50 on the Olympic Charter, it becomes very clear. Like the rule says, and I don't know the exact words, but it says that in the competition field, in the Olympic Village, athletes cannot talk about politics or religion and so on. But when you're talking to the press, yes, you can. So you live I remember I finished the 400 IM, and then I walked 20 meters, and then I can talk about politics. And then I walk another 20 meters back to the Wormdale pool, and then I cannot talk about politics anymore. You know what I mean? It doesn't make much sense.
It's a good example of Olympic Games because the Olympic Games are perceived to be apolitical. That's been the line that's been pushed by the IOC and the Olympic movement, is that politics shouldn't be involved in sport. But there are restrictions upon what people can do when they're participating in the Olympic Games in terms of what they're able to say in the media, and definitely what they're able to say when they're on the podium. If someone wins a medal, then there are very strict guidelines on what you're not allowed to do when you're on the podium. And again, that's a challenging area because now athletes feel much more conscious of wanting to express a particular view in terms of what they feel is inappropriate. LGBTQI rights is a good example of that. Issues of race, ethnicity, also a good example of that.
We prioritize victims from the Global South, migrant workers, those people who are working to build those big stadiums that we love to go to attend to those amazing games. So we should, and we do listen to these people. And then there's accountability, which is we want to hold sports governing bodies accountable, and we want to be part of the solution. We always say we're not part of the problem because we're raising these issues, we're part of the solutions.
So you'll have heard people talking about legacy. Legacy's become this kind of very contested idea. What is the legacy of any particular events? But people in the media are now much more aware of that. And we have talk shows talking about legacy of events and the like. And I think what we found in a number of the more recent mega sporting events is that the outcomes have not necessarily been that positive.
So my interest is in challenging and pushing back a little bit on those minimum rights and trying to do something that says, you have to demonstrate the public value of what you're doing. If we have a change in the way we think about it and think, no, we want our venues, our spaces, our public spaces to be accessible for all, we stop thinking about it in terms of these metrics, we stop thinking about it in terms of satisfying an Equality Act.
Right, I think it's a really tricky one. I mean, there's certain ways that events can highlight these opportunities. I've written previously in my work that events create this catalytic opportunity where there's an influx of resources, people with knowledge that can change not only spaces, but structures, systems, mechanisms of governments to include people who haven't had a voice before. So mega events in some respects are really problematic, and they highlight all the bad things, all the things that are wrong with cities and the space in those cities and how people are not included. But in fact, the event can then bring in new resources to change some of those structures.
But I think sports governing bodies still have a bigger role to play when it comes to ensuring that any country or city that receives those events abide by human rights treaties, so that not only they're not impacting negatively because of those events, but also that society as a whole can advance because of those events, as a legacy of those events.
One of the challenges of all academic work is ensuring that that's translated into, could be policy, could be media coverage, could be actually, change. Federations changing what they do because of work that's been conducted, research that's been conducted.
Academics absolutely have a role to play in that, from highlighting the voices of the people who are being impacted, but also developing those policies, developing ways that we can think about doing these events in different ways. And also we see lots of innovation in smaller events, and lots of smaller events that we tend to see tend to be better at capturing sort of social values and making a more positive impact. And perhaps scaling some of those ideas up to those bigger events is a role for academics as well.
Stop making some noise!
Also learn methods, like how do we actually address this work that's meaningful in a way that policymakers and governments are going to listen to us, because there's no point in doing all of our work and then it's sitting in an academic journal and no one reads it.
With the EventRights projects, we want to really make a difference in research across continents. What I'm particularly appreciative of is the possibility for young academics, for early stage career researchers, to go to another country, to a partner country, and with their help, conduct research that matters.
As part of the EventRights project, I went on 2 mobility trips, so one for 2 months in the US, which involved 1 month at our partner institute in North Carolina State University, and then 2 weeks in Philadelphia and 2 weeks in New York/New Jersey, which are World Cup host cities.
You learn from each other about attitudes and shifting attitudes and things. And I think one of the nice things about the EventRights project is it's allowed these mobilities to take place throughout different countries, and people have learned culturally as well from each other. And I think that's important, to not impose one set of values on another when it's a completely different circumstance.
I think the work that's been done in EventRights to develop the relationships and the partnerships with organisations that can be involved in affecting changes is really a significant outcome. We've produced a large number of research articles. We've done a lot of public work out there too. So these are, of course, really positive outcomes, because I think there's greater awareness of the issue than there was certainly when we started this project a number of years ago.
I believe that EventRights made a positive impact. First, on researchers and their career development. We had a lot of young female scientists who went on a mobility, got publications or grants accepted, and then pursued their career in academia. A second outcome is that we improved the landscape of how major sport events are organized and implemented today. If you look at the bids today, they address human rights issues in a very progressive manner, and societies always develop. They can always do better, and we hope that EventRights contributes to that at least a little bit, with a focus on major sport events. But these findings can be transferred to contexts outside of sports, to any cultural events, festivals, activities that are going on across nations.